The morning of January 21st, 1945, near the village of Nennig, Germany, Staff Sergeant William Jones of the 95th Infantry Division's 377th Regiment crouched in a frozen foxhole, his M1903 Springfield rifle pressed against his shoulder. Through the Weaver 330 scope mounted to his rifle, he could see movement in the ruined factory building 800 yards distant. A German sniper had been working that sector for 3 days, killing 2 American officers and wounding a medic who tried to reach them. Jones had been a hunter in Montana before the war. He knew patience. He knew stillness. He understood how to read terrain and anticipate where a man might position himself to control a field of fire. But what he didn't yet know was that the German across from him, likely an experienced Scharfschütze trained in the traditions that stretched back to the First War, was operating under fundamentally different, tactical assumptions. The German believed in the single, perfect shot, the careful stalk. The bolt-action Karabiner 98k rifle that had served German marksmen since 1935, a weapon descended directly from the Gewehr 98 that had armed Imperial German troops at Verdun and the Somme. Jones shifted his weight slightly, his breath forming small clouds in the January cold. His rifle, the M1903 Springfield, was itself a bolt-action weapon, nearly identical in operation to the German Kar98k he faced. 5 rounds in an internal magazine, manual operation of the bolt after each shot, a firing rate limited by how quickly a man could work the action, reacquire his target, and fire again. In the hierarchy of aimed fire, perhaps 4 or 5 shots per minute for even an experienced marksman. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching, from today. But scattered throughout the American lines that January morning were other rifles. Newer rifles. The M1C and M1D Garand sniper rifles, semi-automatic weapons capable of firing 8 shots as quickly as a man could pull the trigger, with no need to manually cycle a bolt between rounds. These rifles represented a fundamental shift in American sniper doctrine, though even the Americans themselves had not yet fully understood what they possessed. The German sniper in Nennig that morning was following procedures refined over decades. He had selected a position with good observation, multiple firing lanes, and a covered route of withdrawal. He was using a Kar98k, fitted with either a Zeiss Zielvier or possibly a Ajax 4-power scope, precision instruments manufactured to exacting standards by German optical firms, with reputations built over generations. His ammunition was likely the standard 7.92 by 57mm Mauser round, loaded to consistent specifications at German arsenals. He had been trained to achieve first-round hits at ranges exceeding 600 meters. His doctrine emphasized concealment, patience, and the devastating psychological effect of the unseen marksman who could kill with a single shot. What he could not know was that American small arms development had taken a different path. While German ordnance officials had refined and perfected bolt-action rifle design, creating weapons of extraordinary precision and reliability within that mechanical paradigm, American engineers had pursued semi-automatic operation. The decision had been controversial. Many senior officers, trained on bolt-action rifles and steeped in the traditions of aimed rifle fire, questioned whether semi-automatic weapons could achieve the accuracy necessary for serious military use. The Germans, observing American semi-automatic rifle development through intelligence reports and captured weapons, had reached similar conclusions. Semi-automatic operation meant more moving parts, more potential for mechanical failure, less inherent accuracy. The juice, they believed, was not worth the squeeze. They were wrong, but understanding why requires going back to the beginning, to the moment when each nation's approach to the rifle-armed marksman began to diverge. The German sniper tradition emerged from the Western Front of the First World War, where the static nature of trench warfare created ideal conditions for the patient marksman. Men lay in prepared positions, observing enemy trenches through gaps in sandbags or from camouflaged hides, waiting for the careless soldier who exposed himself for a fraction of a second. The distances were known, the trajectories calculated, the atmospheric conditions constant over the course of an engagement. A skilled German Scharfschütze might fire only 3 or 4 shots in an entire day, each one carefully aimed, each one intended to kill. This approach to precision rifle fire shaped German doctrine for the next quarter century. When the Wehrmacht began rearming in the 1930s, the Karabiner 98k became the standard German rifle, a shortened version of the Gewehr 98 that had armed German infantry since 1898. It weighed 8.6 pounds unloaded, measured 43.6 inches in length, and fired the 7.92 by 57mm Mauser cartridge from a 5-round internal magazine. The rifle's Mauser action was renowned for its strength and reliability. 3 locking lugs at the bolt head provided secure lockup. The controlled round feed system ensured reliable chambering under adverse conditions. The safety mechanism could be operated with the rifle at the shoulder, a significant tactical advantage. The rifle's accuracy was exceptional, capable of achieving groups of 3 to 4 inches at 100 meters with quality ammunition, and remaining effective at ranges exceeding 800 meters in the hands of a trained marksman. For sniper use, the Kar98k received optical sights. The most common was the Zielfernrohr 24, or ZF-44, a 4-power telescopic sight manufactured by firms like Zeiss, Hensoldt, and Ajax. These optics represented German optical engineering at its finest. The glass was ground to precise tolerances, the reticles were carefully calibrated. The mounting systems, while varied and sometimes problematic, allowed the scope to be removed and replaced without significant loss of zero. German sniper training emphasized fieldcraft above pure marksmanship. Students learned camouflage and concealment, how to move without being observed, how to select positions that offered both observation and covered withdrawal routes. Range estimation received particular attention as the trajectory of the 7.92 Mauser round required precise knowledge of distance to ensure hits at extended ranges. Students learned to read terrain, to understand how light and shadow affected visibility, to recognize the patterns of enemy behavior that created shooting opportunities. The curriculum included extensive study of ballistics. Students learned how temperature, altitude, and humidity affected bullet trajectory. They practiced making elevation and windage adjustments on their scopes, understanding the relationship between scope adjustments and point of impact at various ranges. They learned to keep detailed logs of their shots, recording range, conditions, and results to refine their understanding of their rifle's capabilities. This training produced snipers who thought in terms of single, decisive shots. The German Scharfschütze was a hunter, not a soldier engaging in sustained fire. His weapon was optimized for this role. The Kar98k's bolt action imposed a rhythm on his shooting, a mandatory pause. Between shots during which the rifle came off target, the bolt was worked, and the firing position was re-established. This wasn't seen as a limitation, but as a feature of proper sniper employment. Sustained fire wasn't the point. Precision was. German military doctrine reflected this philosophy. Snipers were typically employed in pairs, with one man serving as the shooter and the other as a spotter with binoculars or a spotting scope. They occupied positions for extended periods, sometimes days, waiting for high-value targets. Officers, radio operators, machine gun crews, forward observers, these were the preferred targets, men whose deaths would have effects beyond the simple arithmetic of casualties. The psychological dimension was explicitly recognized. A single sniper could paralyze an entire sector, forcing hundreds of men to move cautiously, to avoid certain areas, to feel constantly observed and vulnerable. German training manuals emphasized this aspect of sniper employment, noting that the fear of the unseen marksman was often more valuable than the actual casualties inflicted. While German sniper doctrine refined the traditions of the previous war, American small arms development took a different direction, one that would fundamentally alter the nature of the rifle-armed marksman. The story begins not with snipers but with the basic infantry rifle, and with one man's vision of how American soldiers should be armed. John Cantius Garand was born in Saint-Rémy, Quebec, in 1888, immigrating to Connecticut as a child. He showed early mechanical aptitude, working in textile mills before finding employment at the Springfield Armory in 1919. By then, he had already submitted designs for light machine guns and automatic rifles to the Ordnance Department. What captured his imagination, however, was the semi-automatic rifle, a weapon that would fire one shot with each trigger pull, automatically ejecting the spent case and chambering a fresh round without manual operation of a bolt. The concept was not new. Various inventors had pursued semi-automatic rifle designs since the late 19th century, with limited success. The challenges were substantial. A semi-automatic action required the rifle to harness some of the energy from firing to operate the mechanism, either through recoil or through gas pressure from the burning propellant. This meant more moving parts, tighter tolerances, greater potential for fouling and mechanical failure. It also meant the rifle would be heavier and more complex than a simple bolt-action weapon. Military conservatives, both in America and abroad, were skeptical. They argued that soldiers would waste ammunition, firing wildly instead of taking aimed shots. They questioned whether semi-automatic operation could ever achieve the accuracy of a good bolt-action rifle. They worried about reliability in field conditions, about the complexity of maintenance, about the logistics of supplying ammunition to troops armed with weapons capable of much higher firing rates. Garand persisted. Throughout the 1920s and early 30s, he developed and refined his design at Springfield Armory. His rifle used a gas-operated system with a rotating bolt. Gas tapped from the barrel drove an operating rod that unlocked and withdrew the bolt, extracted and ejected the spent case, cocked the hammer, and stripped a fresh round from the en-bloc clip in the magazine well. When the shooter released the trigger after firing, a return spring drove the operating rod and bolt forward, chambering the new round and locking the action ready for the next shot. The entire cycle took a fraction of a second. The rifle fired the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the standard American rifle round since 1906, from an 8-round en-bloc clip that loaded into the receiver from the top. The clip itself was ejected automatically after the last round was fired, producing a distinctive ping that would become one of the iconic sounds of American infantry combat in the Second World War. In January 1936, after years of trials and modifications, the United States Army adopted Garand's rifle as the MON. Production began slowly at Springfield Armory, then expanded as the coming war became apparent. By 1941, Winchester Repeating Arms had been contracted to produce M1s as well. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, the M1D Garand was still relatively new in service, but production was accelerating rapidly. The M1D represented a fundamental shift in American infantry doctrine. An American rifleman armed with the M1D could fire 8 aimed shots as quickly as he could pull the trigger and reacquire his target. He didn't need to manually operate a bolt between shots, didn't need to break his firing position, didn't need to take his eyes from his target or his cheek from the stock. The practical rate of aimed fire increased from perhaps 15 to 20 rounds per minute with a bolt-action rifle to 40 or 50 rounds per minute with the M1D. General George Patton would later call the M1D the greatest battle implement ever devised, and while that assessment reflected Patton's characteristic hyperbole, it was not entirely wrong. The M1D gave American infantry a significant advantage in firepower at the squad and platoon level, particularly in the fluid, mobile warfare that characterized fighting in Western Europe and the Pacific. But the rifle's potential as a sniper weapon was not immediately recognized. American sniper doctrine at the start of the war remained focused on the M1903 Springfield, the bolt-action rifle that had armed American troops in the First World War. The Springfield was accurate, reliable, well understood. Scope mounting systems existed. The rifle had proven itself capable of precision fire at extended ranges. When the Marines and Army needed sniper rifles in the early war years, they naturally turned to the Springfield, mounting commercial hunting scopes like the Weaver 330 or the Lyman Alaskan to selected rifles. The development of the M1C and M1D sniper rifles began in 1943, driven by observations from combat theaters and the recognition that the Mohn's semi-automatic capability might offer advantages even in precision shooting roles. The project was assigned to Springfield Armory, working in conjunction with the Ordnance Department's technical staff. The fundamental challenge was mounting a telescopic sight to a rifle whose action cycled violently with each shot. The Mohn's operating rod traveled the length of the receiver, its mass moving rapidly rearward and forward with each firing cycle. This created vibrations and stresses that bolt-action rifles simply didn't experience. Any scope mounting system would need to withstand these forces while maintaining zero, the precise relationship between point of aim and point of impact at a given range. Engineers developed two primary mounting solutions. The M1C used a Griffin and Howe side mount that positioned the scope offset to the left side of the receiver, allowing the rifle to be loaded normally with on-block clips. The M1D, which entered production later, used a simpler mounting system developed at Springfield Armory that positioned the scope directly over the receiver, requiring the rifle to be loaded with single rounds rather than clips. Both systems were designed to allow the scope to be removed and replaced without significant loss of zero, though this capability proved more theoretical than practical in field use. The standard scope for both variants was the M82, a 2.2 power telescopic sight manufactured by Weaver. The relatively low magnification was deliberate, based on combat experience showing that higher magnification scopes had excessively narrow fields of view and were difficult to use in the fluid conditions of infantry combat. The M82 provided sufficient magnification for target identification and precise aiming at ranges out to 600 yards, while maintaining enough field of view for the shooter to maintain situational awareness. The complete M1D sniper rifle weighed approximately 10.2 pounds with scope and mount, roughly 1.6 pounds heavier than the standard Mohn. The additional weight actually helped stabilize the rifle during firing, damping some of the felt recoil and muzzle movement. The rifle retained the Mohn's 8-round capacity, though the D variant's mounting system meant those 8 rounds had to be loaded individually rather than via on-block clip. Training for American snipers varied considerably depending on theater and unit. The Marines, building on their tradition of marksmanship that dated to the early 20th century, established more formalized sniper training programs. The Army's approach was more ad hoc, with division and corps-level schools providing varying levels of instruction. What unified American sniper training was an emphasis on rapid engagement and volume of fire that differed markedly from German doctrine. American instructors taught students to engage multiple targets in quick succession, to shoot and move rapidly, to provide suppressive fire when necessary. The semi-automatic capability of the Mohn platform was explicitly incorporated into tactics. An American sniper with an M1D could engage a target, observe the impact, make a rapid correction if necessary, and fire again within 2 seconds. This stood in stark contrast to the German sniper's approach, where each shot was followed by a deliberate pause to work the bolt action, a process that typically took 4 to 6 seconds even for experienced shooters. The ballistic performance of the .30-06 Springfield cartridge fired from the M1D was well documented through extensive testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground and other facilities. The standard M2 ball ammunition used a 150-grain bullet with a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,800 feet per second from the Mohn's 24-inch barrel. At 100 yards, the bullet dropped approximately 2.4 inches below line of bore. At 300 yards, the drop increased to approximately 24 inches. At 600 yards, the bullet dropped approximately 144 inches, 12 feet below line of bore. These trajectory figures required snipers to understand holdover and scope adjustment. The M82 scope had adjustments graduated in minutes of angle, with 1 minute of angle equaling approximately 1 inch at 100 yards. To zero the rifle for 300 yards might require 18 to 20 minutes of elevation adjustment from a 100-yard zero. Engaging targets at 600 yards required either significant holdover, aiming several feet above the target, or substantial scope adjustment. Wind deflection posed another challenge. A 10-mile-per-hour crosswind would drift a .30-06 bullet approximately 6 inches at 300 yards and 24 inches at 600 yards. Reading wind required experience and judgment, observing grass movement, tree branches, mirage effects, and other indicators. American training emphasized practical wind reading over theoretical calculations, teaching students to observe and adjust based on trace observation and impact. The ammunition supply situation favored American snipers significantly. While German snipers often received special lots of ammunition selected for consistency and accuracy, American snipers typically used standard M2 ball ammunition from regular production lots. The sheer scale of American ammunition production over 13 billion rounds of .30-06 ammunition manufactured during WWII. The war meant that quality control was generally high, and ammunition performance was reasonably consistent. An American sniper never worried about conserving ammunition. He could fire 20 rounds to confirm his zero, fire 50 rounds in practice, and still have unlimited ammunition available for actual combat employment. German snipers, by contrast, operated under increasing ammunition constraints as the war progressed. While quality remained generally high when ammunition was available, the quantities were more limited. A German sniper might carry 40 to 60 rounds for his Kar98k, and resupply could be uncertain. This scarcity reinforced the German emphasis on the single, well-aimed shot rather than rapid engagement of multiple targets. The tactical employment of American sniper rifles reflected broader doctrinal differences. American snipers were often used in more aggressive roles than their German counterparts, moving with infantry units, providing overwatch during advances, engaging targets of opportunity, rather than lying in wait for specific high-value targets. The semi-automatic capability of the Mohn platform supported this employment, allowing the sniper to engage multiple targets rapidly or to provide suppressive fire if necessary. The village of Nennig sat on the German side of the Saar River, a cluster of stone buildings that had become a strong point in the Siegfried Line defences. In January 1945, the village had changed hands twice in brutal fighting. Now it was held by elements of the 11th SS Panzergrenadier Division, who had fortified the ruins and positioned snipers to control the approaches. The American 95th Infantry Division was tasked with clearing the village and establishing a bridgehead across the Saar. Technical Sergeant Harold Furness of the 377th Infantry Regiment was 24 years old, from rural Pennsylvania, and had been hunting deer since he was 12. He had been issued an M1D sniper rifle in October 1944 and had received approximately 2 weeks of additional training at the division sniper school before being assigned to support his regiment's operations. His scope was zeroed for 300 yards, a compromise setting that allowed engagement from 200 to 500 yards with manageable holdover. On the morning of January 21st, Furness was positioned in the basement of a destroyed farmhouse, approximately 400 yards from the factory building where the German sniper was believed to be operating. His spotter, Private First Class Robert Chen, watched through M17 binoculars, scanning the factory's windows and shell holes. They had been in position since before dawn, moving into place in darkness to avoid observation. The German sniper fired at 08:43 hours. The report was distinctive, the sharp crack of the 7.92 Mauser cartridge echoing off the ruined buildings. An American lieutenant with the forward company fell, hit in the chest. Medics reached him within minutes, but he died before they could evacuate him. It was the third American killed by this particular sniper over the past 72 hours. Chen marked the muzzle flash location, a window on the factory's second floor, partially obscured by hanging sheet metal. Furness shifted his position slightly, bringing his rifle to bear. Through his M82 scope, he could see the window, but the interior was too dark to distinguish any detail. He waited. German snipers were trained to fire and immediately withdraw from their firing position, knowing that muzzle flash and sound would draw counter-sniper fire. The standard German procedure was to have multiple prepared positions and to move between them, never firing twice from the same location. But something was different this morning. At 08:51 hours, the German fired again. Another American fell, this one a radio operator with the company command post. The shot had come from the same window. Chen confirmed it through his binoculars. Either the German was overconfident, or his withdrawal route had been blocked, forcing him to remain in position. Furness adjusted his hold, aiming approximately 1 foot above where he estimated the German's head would be to account for bullet drop at 400 yards. He controlled his breathing, let out half a breath, and began to press the trigger. The M1D fired with its characteristic sharp report, the recoil pressing straight back into his shoulder. Through the scope, he saw his bullet impact on the window frame, perhaps 6 inches left of where he had aimed. In a firefight with a bolt-action rifle, Furness would now be working his bolt, taking 4 to 6 seconds to reload and reacquire his target. The German would have that time to move, to take cover, to relocate. But Furness had a semi-automatic rifle. The M1D's action had already cycled. A fresh round was chambered. The rifle was still at his shoulder. He adjusted his point of aim slightly right, compensating for his first shot's impact, and fired again. 1.2 seconds after his first shot, the second bullet went through the window. Chen, watching through binoculars, saw the impact, and then saw movement the German sniper falling backward, visible for just a moment, before disappearing into the darkness of the room. They waited for 5 minutes. No more shots came from that window. No movement. The German sniper, whether killed or wounded, was out of action. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. What had just occurred was significant beyond the tactical elimination of a single enemy sniper. Furness had engaged and corrected onto a target in less than 2 seconds, a speed that would have been impossible with a bolt-action rifle. The German, trained in the bolt-action paradigm, had not anticipated the possibility of immediate follow-up shots. He had done what German doctrine taught, fired from concealment, and prepared to withdraw. But the withdrawal had not come fast enough. The second shot arrived before he could move. This pattern repeated across the Western Front throughout the winter and spring of 1945. American snipers with M1C and M1D rifles found that their semi-automatic capability provided a significant advantage in counter-sniper operations. They could engage, observe, impact, correct, and fire again before German snipers armed with Kar98k rifles could complete their bolt cycle and prepare for a second shot. Near Aachen, in November 1944, Private First Class William McBride engaged a German sniper position at approximately 350 yards. His first shot missed, impacting low. His second shot, fired 1.8 seconds later, hit the German sniper in the upper chest. The German's rifle, a Kar98k with a ZF-42 scope, was recovered and examined. The German had fired 1 shot. He had not had time to chamber a second round. Reports from the field began accumulating at division and corps headquarters throughout late 1944 and early 1945. American snipers were achieving success rates that seemed improbable given their relatively limited training compared to German snipers. The pattern was consistent: rapid engagement, immediate follow-up shots, successful elimination of targets that should have had time to take cover after the first shot. Intelligence officers interrogating German prisoners began hearing about the American automatic sniper rifles that could fire multiple aimed shots without the shooter removing the rifle from his shoulder. Some German soldiers believed the Americans had developed a new type of weapon, perhaps a specially modified automatic rifle with a scope. The reality that the Americans were simply using scoped versions of their standard semi-automatic infantry rifle was harder to accept than the notion of some exotic new weapon system. The psychological impact on German snipers was notable. Men who had been trained to fire and withdraw, who had internalized the 4 to 6 second cycle time of bolt-action operation as the fundamental rhythm of sniper combat, found themselves facing opponents who operated on a different timeline. The American sniper might miss his first shot, but he would have a second shot, and possibly a third, before a German sniper could work his bolt and fire again. This advantage was most pronounced in counter-sniper operations, where both shooters were actively trying to eliminate each other. The American sniper could afford to take a slightly rushed first shot, knowing he could immediately follow up. The German sniper, aware that he would need several seconds to reload after firing, felt pressure to ensure his first shot was perfect. This psychological pressure, subtle but real, affected performance. German after-action reports from this period occasionally mentioned the American sniper threat, though rarely in detail. One report from the 6th SS Mountain Division, operating in the Vosges region in January 1945, noted that American snipers were unusually aggressive and capable of rapid fire that suggests automatic weapons. The report recommended that German snipers work in larger teams with multiple shooters to counter the American advantage in rate of fire. The statistical evidence, compiled from unit records and after-action reports, supported the anecdotal accounts. American snipers in the European theatre of operations averaged approximately 1.3 enemy casualties per day of active employment in the final 6 months of the war. This figure, while modest, represented a significant increase over earlier periods when most American snipers were using bolt action. M1903, Springfield rifles. The increase correlated closely with the introduction and distribution of M1C and M1D rifles. German sniper effectiveness, by comparison, declined throughout 1945 as experienced snipers were killed or captured and replacements received increasingly abbreviated training. The Scharfschützen schools that had operated throughout the war, providing weeks of intensive instruction, were disrupted by Allied bombing and the deteriorating military situation. New snipers received sometimes only days of training before being sent to the front. The quality of optical sights declined as German optical manufacturing facilities were damaged or captured. Ammunition quality became more variable as production was disrupted and storage facilities were destroyed. But beyond these material factors, there was a growing recognition among German snipers who survived into the final months of the war that their doctrine, their training, their, quote, entire approach to precision shooting was optimized for a type of warfare that no longer existed. The careful, patient sniper who occupied a position for days, who fired only a few shots, who prioritized the single perfect kill. This approach worked in static defensive warfare where time and space could be controlled. It worked less well against an enemy who moved aggressively, who had overwhelming artillery and air support, and whose snipers could fire multiple aimed shots in the time it took to work a bolt action. American troops, for their part, developed a healthy respect for German snipers, but not the fear that characterized earlier encounters. By early 1945, American infantry knew that German snipers were dangerous but containable. Counter-sniper procedures were well established. American snipers with their M1D rifles could engage and eliminate German snipers effectively. Artillery and mortar fire could suppress suspected sniper positions. The days when a single German sniper could paralyze an entire American unit were largely over, not because German snipers had become less skilled, but because American forces had developed the tactics, training, and equipment to counter them effectively. The M1D sniper rifle represented more than just a technical improvement over bolt-action sniping rifles. It represented a different philosophy of how precision shooting fit into modern industrial warfare. Where the Germans saw the sniper as a specialized craftsman, carefully preparing each shot, the Americans increasingly saw the sniper as another infantry support element, providing accurate fire rapidly and aggressively. The semi-automatic capability of the M1D platform enabled this approach in ways that bolt-action rifles simply could not match. The final months of the war in Europe saw the M1D and M1C rifles distributed more widely throughout American infantry divisions, though never in the quantities that doctrine manuals suggested would be ideal. Production constraints and competing priorities meant that most American divisions had perhaps 20 to 30 sniper rifles available, divided among their regiments and battalions. This was sufficient to provide sniper support at the company and battalion level, but meant that many qualified marksmen continued using standard M1D rifles or even M1903 Springfields with commercial scopes. Technical Sergeant Harold Furness, who had eliminated the German sniper at Nennig in January, continued operating throughout the final campaigns in Germany. His service record, preserved in National Archives files, documents 17 confirmed kills between October 1944 and May 1945, though the actual number was likely higher given the difficulty of confirming kills in fluid combat conditions. He survived the war and returned to Pennsylvania, where he worked as a machinist until his death in 1983. In recorded interviews, conducted in the 1970s, he spoke about his wartime experience with the careful precision of a man who understood exactly what he had done and why it had mattered. He described the M1D as reliable but not perfect. The rifle required careful maintenance, particularly around the gas system where carbon buildup could cause malfunctions. The scope mounting system was adequate but not exceptional. The rifle needed to be re-zeroed periodically, particularly after rough handling or transportation. The 2.2 power magnification of the M82 scope was sometimes insufficient for identification and engagement at longer ranges, though Furness noted that most of his actual engagements occurred at 300 yards or less, where the scope was entirely adequate. What he emphasized repeatedly in these interviews was the psychological advantage of knowing he could fire a rapid second shot if his first missed. This knowledge, he explained, affected how he approached every engagement. He could afford to take a shot that was 80% certain rather than waiting for the perfect 95% opportunity. If he missed, he could correct and fire again before the target could take cover. This changed the entire rhythm of sniper combat, transforming it from a patient waiting game into something more dynamic and aggressive. German snipers who survived the war and were later interviewed expressed varying perspectives on their American counterparts. Some maintained that German training and doctrine were superior, that the emphasis on fieldcraft and the single perfect shot represented a more professional approach to precision shooting. Others acknowledged that the American semi-automatic rifles provided a significant tactical advantage, particularly in the fast-moving combat of the war's final months. What unified these accounts was recognition that the war they had trained to fight was not the war they had actually fought, and that American material superiority had extended even to areas like precision shooting, where craftsmanship and individual skill should theoretically have mattered more than industrial capacity. The effectiveness of the M1D can be measured in various ways, none entirely satisfactory. Confirmed kill counts are notoriously unreliable in combat conditions where bodies cannot be recovered and where the fog of war makes attribution difficult. What can be documented is that American infantry commanders consistently requested more sniper rifles as the war progressed, suggesting that they found the capability valuable. After-action reports frequently mentioned American snipers, providing effective suppression and elimination of German snipers and other high-value targets. German prisoners occasionally mentioned American sniper fire as a significant concern, though less frequently than they mentioned American artillery, air power, and armor. Perhaps the most telling evidence comes from comparative analyses of sniper effectiveness across different theaters and time periods. American snipers using M1903 Springfield rifles in the early war period achieved lower average casualty rates than those using M1C and M1D rifles in the later war period, even accounting for variables like target density and engagement frequency. The semi-automatic capability translated into measurable improvements in effectiveness, though the magnitude of improvement was modest rather than revolutionary. The M1D was not a war-winning weapon, but it was a weapon that made American snipers more effective at their job. The Marine Corps, which had developed its own sniper program independently of the Army, continued using bolt-action rifles throughout the war, primarily the M1903 Springfield, with unertl 8 power scopes. Marine snipers in the Pacific Theater achieved remarkable success with these rifles, suggesting that bolt-action weapons remained viable in many combat situations. The difference was context. Pacific Island warfare often involved more static defensive positions and longer engagement ranges, where the advantages of semi-automatic fire were less pronounced. In the fluid, close-range combat of European hedgerows and urban warfare, the M1D's rapid-fire capability proved more valuable. The story of the M1D sniper rifle and its confrontation with German bolt-action sniping doctrine illuminates larger truths about the Second World War and about technological change in military affairs. The Germans had entered the war with arguably the world's finest bolt-action rifle in the Kar98k, supported by excellent optical sights and a training program that produced skilled individual marksmen. What they lacked was the industrial capacity and doctrinal flexibility to respond when their opponents developed different approaches that rendered traditional advantages less relevant. American semi-automatic rifle development represented a deliberate choice to prioritize rate of fire over incremental improvements in accuracy and reliability. This choice was controversial when it was made in the 1930s, with many military professionals arguing that semi-automatic operation was unnecessary and possibly counterproductive. What vindicated the American approach was not that semi-automatic rifles were inherently superior to bolt-action rifles in all circumstances, but that they were superior in the specific circumstances of mid-20th century industrial warfare, where volume of fire and rapid engagement often mattered more than the perfection of individual shots. The German investment in precision and craftsmanship, while admirable, reflected assumptions about warfare that were increasingly obsolete. The careful sniper who fired 3 shots per day, each one perfectly aimed, was less valuable in 1945 than the aggressive sniper who fired 30 shots per day, even if some of those shots were less than perfect. The mathematics of industrial warfare favored quantity with acceptable quality over small quantities of exceptional quality. This principle applied to tanks, aircraft, artillery, and rifles. The Germans produced superior individual examples of nearly every weapon type, but the Allies produced adequate weapons in quantities that overwhelmed whatever qualitative advantages the Germans possessed. The Kar98k was a better bolt-action rifle than any bolt-action rifle the Allies produced. German optical sights were superior to most American scopes. German sniper training was more thorough and more comprehensive than most American sniper training. But these advantages meant little when American snipers could fire multiple aimed shots in the time it took German snipers to work their bolt action once, and when American industrial capacity ensured that ammunition, replacement rifles, and spare parts were always available in abundance. The psychological dimension of this technological gap deserves emphasis. German snipers had been trained to believe that their skill, their patience, their adherence to proper fieldcraft would allow them to dominate the battlefield. They had experienced validation of this belief in earlier campaigns, where their training and equipment proved superior to Soviet and British opposition. The encounter with American semi-automatic sniper rifles forced a recognition that skill and training could be defeated by technological advantage, that the individual craftsman could be overwhelmed by the products of industrial mass production. This recognition extended beyond snipers to the entire German military by 1945. The soldiers who had marched into Poland in 1939 believing in German technical and tactical superiority had been forced through years of brutal combat to acknowledge that their opponents possessed advantages that training and courage could not overcome. The American soldier might not be as well trained individually as the German soldier, but he had better equipment, more ammunition, reliable logistics, air support, artillery support, and the confidence that came from knowing that losses could be replaced while German losses could not. The M1D sniper rifle was a small part of this larger pattern, but it exemplified the principle. An American sniper with 2 weeks of training and an M1D could achieve results comparable to a German sniper with months of training and a Kar98k, not because the American was more skilled, but because his equipment allowed him to make mistakes and correct them rapidly. The rifle's semi-automatic operation compensated for limitations in training and experience, democratizing precision shooting in ways that would have been impossible with bolt-action weapons. Post-war analysis by both American and German military professionals acknowledged these dynamics, though interpretations varied. American analysts tended to emphasize the importance of technological innovation and industrial capacity, citing the Mohn rifle as an example of how American engineering provided practical advantages that affected battlefield outcomes. German analysts, particularly those writing in the 1950s and 60s, often focused on the asymmetry of resources, arguing that German skill and determination had been overwhelmed by Allied material superiority rather than defeated through tactical or technical innovation. Both perspectives contained truth. The M1D was neither a perfect weapon nor a revolutionary one. It was a practical application of semi-automatic technology to the specialized role of precision shooting, and it proved effective in the specific context of combat in northwestern Europe in 1944 and 1945. Whether it would have been equally effective in different circumstances, the vast distances of the Eastern Front, the jungles of the Pacific, the deserts of North Africa remains unknowable. What can be known is that in the circumstances where it was actually employed, it gave American snipers advantages that translated into measurable battlefield success. The M1D sniper rifle had a relatively brief service life. Production ceased with the end of the war, and the rifles in inventory were gradually withdrawn from service through the late 1940s and early 1950s as the military transitioned to new weapons systems. The Korean War saw limited use of M1D rifles, primarily in the early months of the conflict, when equipment shortages forced the army to pull weapons from storage. Marines in Korea continued to prefer bolt-action sniper rifles, using M1903 Springfields with Unatel scopes for most precision shooting tasks. By the mid-1950s, American military doctrine was shifting toward different approaches to designated marksman and sniper roles. The M14 rifle, adopted in 1957, was itself a semi-automatic weapon firing the 7.62 by 51mm NATO cartridge from a 20-round detachable box magazine. Sniper variants of the M14 would eventually be developed, continuing the American preference for semi-automatic operation in precision shooting roles. The philosophy, validated by the M1D, that rapid follow-up shots provided tactical advantages worth pursuing even at some cost in pure mechanical accuracy, had become embedded in American small arms doctrine. German military thinking evolved differently in the post-war period. The Bundeswehr, established in 1955 as the Armed Forces of West Germany, initially adopted surplus American Mohn rifles before transitioning to the G3 rifle in the 1950s. German sniper doctrine, however, retained many elements of the traditional approach developed during the World Wars, The emphasis on fieldcraft, on the single well-aimed shot, on patience and concealment remained central to German sniper training. When the Bundeswehr developed dedicated sniper rifles, they were bolt-action weapons, first the Mauser SP-66 and later the G-22, reflecting a continuing belief that bolt-action operation provided advantages in accuracy and reliability that outweighed the rate of fire benefits of semi-automatic designs. This doctrinal divergence persisted through the Cold War and into the modern era. American snipers have generally used semi-automatic weapons when available, accepting slightly larger and heavier rifles in exchange for rapid follow-up shot capability. German and many other European snipers have continued to prefer bolt-action rifles, optimizing for maximum accuracy and minimum weight. Neither approach is objectively superior. Each reflects different assumptions about how snipers should be employed and what tactical situations they are most likely to encounter. The veterans who used these weapons in combat rarely engaged in such doctrinal debates. Harold Furness, when asked in his 1970s interviews whether he thought the M1D was better than the German sniper rifles, responded that it was better for how he had used it, but that didn't mean it was better in any absolute sense. He noted that if he had been tasked with taking a single shot at a high-value target at 800 yards, he might have preferred a bolt-action rifle with a higher power scope. But for the combat, he actually experienced rapid engagements at moderate ranges against targets that had to be hit quickly before they could take cover. The M1D had been exactly what he needed. This pragmatic perspective characterized many veteran accounts. The men who had fought with these weapons understood that effectiveness was contextual, that no weapon was perfect for all situations, and that the outcome of battles depended on far more than the relative merits of rifles. They had experienced the terror and confusion of combat, had seen friends killed by enemy fire, had themselves killed enemy soldiers who were simply men doing their duty for their country. The technical specifications of rifles, while interesting to historians and weapons enthusiasts, were peripheral to the central reality of war that it was terrible, necessary only because more terrible alternatives existed, and that its lessons were learned at costs that could never be fully calculated. The M1D sniper rifle today exists primarily in museums and private collections. Several examples are held at the Springfield Armory National Historic Site. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans displays an M1D with its original M82 scope. Private collectors prize these rifles, particularly those with documented combat history, though verified provenance is rare. Original M82 scopes are scarce, as many were damaged during service or removed and sold as surplus after the war. Technical specifications and after-action reports can be found in National Archives record groups, particularly RG 338 for U.S. Army Operational Records and RG 156 for Ordnance Department records. Veteran interviews are preserved in various oral history collections, including the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and collections maintained by individual museums and universities. These sources provide fragmentary glimpses of how the rifle was actually used in combat, though the full story will always remain partially obscured by the chaos and incompleteness of wartime record-keeping. What remains clear across all these sources is that the M1D represented a significant moment in the evolution of military small arms, a point where semi-automatic operation proved its value even in the specialized role of precision shooting. The rifle was not perfect, was produced in limited quantities, and saw only brief service before being superseded by newer designs. But it demonstrated convincingly that the bolt-action paradigm that had dominated military rifles for over half a century could be successfully challenged, and that rate of fire could sometimes matter more than the incremental accuracy advantages of manual operation. The German snipers who faced American semi-automatic sniper fire in the winter and spring of 1945 learned this lesson at terrible cost. Discovering that the doctrine and training that had served them well against earlier opponents could not overcome an adversary who operated on different principles with different tools. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.